My father suspended me until I apologized to my sister. I just said all right. The next morning, she smirked until she saw my empty desk and resignation letter. The company lawyer ran in pale. "Tell me you didn't post it." My father's smile died on the spot. The conference room fell silent after my father delivered his verdict. 2 weeks without pay for undermining my sister's authority. Alyssa sat there smirking in her designer blazer, waiting for me to beg or scream. I didn't do either. I looked at the blueprints on the table designs I drew, but wasn't credited for, and realized my loyalty had expired. I simply said, "All right." The silence that followed was terrifying because for the first time they weren't looking at a daughter, they were looking at an architect planning a demolition. Drop a comment, and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. My office had been my sanctuary for 6 years. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked the Chicago skyline. A view I had earned not by blood but by billable hours and structural impossibilities made possible. The walls held my degrees framed in simple black wood alongside the architectural awards the development division had won under my direct leadership. Photos of my team celebrating the completion of the Riverside project lined one shelf. Another held the prototypes of every major design I had guided, from a napkin sketch to a steel and glass reality. I had built something here. Not just buildings, but a standard. A level of excellence that Sterling Developments had never achieved before I walked through these doors. And now, I was dismantling it. I walked in and closed the door. I didn't lock it. I didn't need privacy to cry, because I wasn't going to cry. Tears imply loss, and I wasn't losing anything today. I was shedding dead weight. I pulled a cardboard box from the supply closet and began to pack. I moved with surgical precision. The degrees came down first, then the awards. I wrapped them in bubble wrap, not with nostalgia, but with the efficiency of an archivist preserving evidence. My assistant, a bright young woman named Sarah, knocked and poked her head in. She looked terrified. The rumor mill in a corporate firm moves faster than fiber optics. She asked if I was okay if I was really leaving for 2 weeks. I told her to take the rest of the day off. I didn't tell her I wasn't coming back in 2 weeks. I didn't tell her I wasn't coming back ever. As I placed the prototype of the Sterling Signature Eco Frame into the box, my hand paused for a fraction of a second. This was the crown jewel. The structural core of every luxury home we were currently building. It was a modular, sustainable load-bearing system that cut construction time by 40% and increased thermal efficiency by half. Richard loved it because it saved him millions in materials. Alyssa loved it because she could sell it as green tech luxury. I loved it because I invented it. I remembered the nights I spent designing it, the weekends I sacrificed, refining the geometry, the sheer physical exhaustion of proving it worked when everyone said it wouldn't. For years, people asked me why I stayed. Why I let Richard take credit for my designs. Why I let Alyssa pretend she managed projects she couldn't even read blueprints for. They saw my silence as weakness. They saw my endurance as a lack of self-respect. They were wrong. It wasn't weakness. It was the invisible chain of the survivor. When you grow up in a house where love is a commodity traded for compliance, you learn a very specific survival set. You learn that speaking up gets you cut off, but staying quiet keeps you in the room. You learn to become essential so they cannot afford to discard you. You internalize the idea that if you just work harder, if you just produce more value, eventually the ledger will balance and they will have to respect you. That is the trap. It is a prison built of hope. You think you are earning your place, but really you are just increasing their profit margins. But there is a tipping point. A moment when the survivor realizes that the debt will never be paid because the other side keeps moving the decimal point. That realization doesn't break you. It clarifies you. My silence over the last 6 years wasn't submission. It was data collection. I wasn't just enduring the abuse. I was documenting the infrastructure. I was learning where the load-bearing walls were. I was memorizing the codes to the safe. I was patenting the technology in my own name because I knew deep down that a day would come when they would try to erase me. And when they did, I needed to be sure that when I walked out the door, I didn't just leave an empty chair. I needed to be sure I took the foundation with me. The box was full. I taped it shut. The sound of the tape gun was loud in the quiet office. It sounded like a gavel coming down. I looked around the room one last time. It looked sterile, generic. like I had never been there at all. That was the point. My father wanted to suspend me to teach me a lesson about hierarchy. He wanted me to sit at home for 2 weeks and think about my insolence. He wanted me to come back grateful for my paycheck. He didn't realize that he had just handed me the one thing I had been waiting for. He gave me the exit strategy. I picked up the box. It was heavy, but I didn't feel the weight. I felt only the terrifying, exhilarating lightness of a bridge burning behind me. To understand why I was leaving, you have to understand the lie that started it all. The incident that sparked this exodus happened 3 days earlier. Alyssa, as vice president of client relations, had closed a deal with a tech mogul from Silicon Valley. He wanted a futuristic eco-mansion on the lakefront, something that would get him into Architectural Digest. It was a $20 million project. The commission alone would cover Alyssa's lifestyle for a year. To close the deal, she promised him it would be move-in ready in 90 days. 90 days. It was a physical impossibility. The foundation curing time alone was 28 days. The custom glazing for the windows had a 12-week lead time. The permits would take 2 months. When I saw the contract, I didn't panic. I didn't scream. I did what a project director does. I ran the critical path analysis. I drafted a revised Gantt chart showing a realistic timeline of 9 months. I sent it to the client, copying Richard and Alyssa with a simple note saying that to ensure structural integrity and code compliance, this was the expedited schedule. It was professional. It was factual. It was necessary to prevent a breach of contract lawsuit that would have bankrupted us. Alyssa had stormed into my office screaming about sabotage. She didn't care about the physics of concrete or the logistics of supply chains. She cared about the commission check. Richard sided with her. He told me that sales rely on vision, and I was suffocating the company with my negativity. That was the moment I realized that to them, I wasn't an architect. I was just the mechanic they kept in the basement to fix the engines they kept breaking. I was taping the last box when I felt a presence in the doorway. I didn't have to turn around to know it was Alyssa. The scent of her expensive perfume, something floral and cloying, filled the room. She walked in like she owned the place, running a hand over the drafting table I had used to design 3 award-winning estates. She looked at my boxes and smirked. She told me that maybe this time off would be good for me. She said I needed to learn that being part of this family meant supporting the vision, not checking the math. She picked up the set of blueprints for the eco-mansion, the ones I had drawn, the ones she couldn't even read, and held them like a trophy. She said she was going to take over the project management herself. She said it couldn't be that hard to tell contractors what to do. I almost warned her. I almost told her that the soil composition on the lakefront required a specific pile-driving depth or the whole house would slide into the water. I almost told her that the steel suppliers required a 40% deposit by Friday or we lost our slot. But I didn't. I just looked at her holding the plans upside down and I felt a cold, hard satisfaction. I picked up my box. As I walked out, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the company server. Access denied. Your credentials have been revoked by Administrator Richard Sterling. He had locked me out of the system before I even left the building. He thought he was cutting off my access. He didn't realize he was locking himself inside a burning building. The next morning, I dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than my first car. I pulled my hair back. I applied lipstick with the precision of a sniper adjusting a scope. I drove to the office at 9 o'clock sharp. The receptionist looked confused when I walked in carrying nothing but a thin leather portfolio. I didn't go to my office. I went straight to the boardroom. Richard was there drinking coffee, looking smug. Alyssa was next to him, scrolling on her phone. Nathan, the corporate counsel, sat at the end of the table looking weary. He was a good lawyer, careful and observant, the only person in the building besides me who actually read the fine print. Richard asked if I was there to apologize. He told me to make it quick because they had a strategy meeting for the eco-mansion. I placed the portfolio on the mahogany table. I didn't sit down. I told him I wasn't there to apologize. I was there to resign. I slid the letter across the glass surface toward Nathan, not Richard. I told them that effective immediately I was terminating my employment. Furthermore, per clause 17 subsection B of my employment agreement, I was triggering the constructive dismissal provision. Richard laughed. It was a bark of a laugh, dismissive and arrogant. He asked what I was talking about. He said I was suspended, not fired, and I couldn't claim constructive dismissal. I kept my eyes on Nathan. I explained that locking a project director out of the server, removing their access to active blueprints, and publicly demoting them without a performance review constituted a material breach of contract. I had drafted that clause 5 years ago, back when Richard was going through his second divorce and the company was unstable. I did it to protect myself from exactly this kind of volatility. I told them that under the terms of the contract, the penalty for constructive dismissal was an immediate buyout of my equity stake. I had done the math based on the last valuation. I told them the company owed me $950,000. And per the contract, it was payable within 30 days. Richard stopped laughing. His face went a mottled shade of red. He slammed his hand on the table and shouted that I was delusional. He said he wouldn't pay me a dime. He said he would sue me for insubordination. He looked at Nathan, expecting his lawyer to attack me. But Nathan wasn't looking at Richard. He was reading the contract I had slid over to him. His face had gone very pale. He looked up at me, and in his eyes, I saw the dawn of realization. He knew. He remembered the clause. And he knew I had them. Alyssa jumped in, her voice shrill. She called me greedy. She said I was trying to bankrupt the family. She said I was jealous because she closed the big deal. I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel the old sting of inadequacy. I just felt pity. She was fighting for a crown that I knew was made of tin. I told her she could have the deal. She could have the title, she could have the office with the view. But she couldn't have my equity. Richard stood up, looming over the table, using his physical size to intimidate, a tactic that had worked on me when I was 12. It didn't work when I was 30. He pointed a finger at me and told me to get out. He said if I wanted a war, I would get one. He said he would bury me in legal fees until I was begging for my old job back. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who has planted the dynamite and is just waiting for the fuse to burn down. I told him that the money was just the beginning. I told him there was one more thing we needed to discuss. One more clause in the contract that he had definitely forgotten about. I turned to page 14 of the document in front of Nathan. The section on intellectual property and licensing. Nathan turned the page. I saw his eyes scan the text, widening with every line. He looked up at Richard, his voice trembling slightly. She's right, Richard. The Sterling Signature Eco Frame. The patent isn't held by the company. It's held by Isabella Sterling, LLC. So what? Richard spat. She works for me. Her work belongs to me. Not according to this addendum, I said, my voice cool and steady. Clause 22 states that the company has a revocable license to use the intellectual property contingent upon my continued employment as project director. In the event of termination without cause or constructive dismissal, the license is automatically revoked. Effectively, immediately. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table. That means you cannot pour the foundation for the tech mogul's mansion. You cannot finish the 3 luxury estates in Highland Park. You cannot even use the marketing materials that feature my designs. If you do, I will sue you for patent infringement, and I will win. You are currently sitting on a pile of contracts you cannot fulfill, selling a product you no longer own. The silence in the room was absolute. It wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. I watched the blood drain from Richard's face. He looked at Alyssa, hoping she would have a solution, but she was just staring at me, her mouth slightly open, looking like a child who had broken a vase she couldn't afford to replace. I'll be expecting the buyout check within 30 days, I said, picking up my portfolio. And Nathan, I'd advise you to start drafting the cease and desist letters to the contractors. You don't want to be liable for unauthorized construction. I walked out of the boardroom. I didn't slam the door. I closed it gently with a soft click that sounded like the final tumblers of a lock falling into place. 3 months later, the silence in my new studio was broken only by the scratch of my drafting pencil. It was a converted loft in the West Loop, flooded with natural light and free of toxic family politics. I had used a portion of the buyout money which Nathan had ensured was wired to me exactly 29 days after my resignation to set up shop. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. But across town, the empire I had left behind was burning. The collapse of Sterling Developments wasn't immediate. It was a slow, agonizing grind. It started with the cease and desist orders. The tech mogul, furious that his dream home had been halted before the first beam was raised, sued for breach of contract. That lawsuit triggered a clause in the company's insurance policy that raised their premiums by 200%. Then came the logistical nightmare. Alyssa tried to step in. She tried to be the visionary. She hired a junior architect to tweak the designs enough to bypass my patent. But you cannot tweak physics. Without the eco-frame, the load-bearing calculations didn't work. The junior architect told her they needed to switch to traditional steel beams, which would double the cost and triple the timeline. Alyssa screamed at him. She told him to make it work. She thought that authority meant commanding results. She didn't understand the illusion of power via the empty chair. For years, Alyssa had sat in meetings, nodded at clients, and signed her name to documents, believing that this was the work. She believed that her title vice president gave her power. She didn't realize that her power was entirely borrowed. It was positional authority power granted by a hierarchy. It is fragile. It relies on the obedience of others. What I had was competence authority. Power derived from knowing how the machine works. When you have competence authority, you don't need a title to lead. You just need to be the one who knows how to keep the roof from collapsing. When I left, I didn't just leave a vacancy in the org chart. I removed the competence authority from the building. Alyssa was left sitting in the big chair holding the steering wheel of a car that had no engine. She kept turning the wheel, shouting commands, but the vehicle just sat there rusting in the driveway. I heard through the grapevine contractors who called me begging for work that Richard was bleeding cash. He was paying penalties on 3 different stalled sites. He had fired the junior architect. He was taking meetings with bankruptcy lawyers. The Sterling name, once synonymous with innovation, was now a warning label for stalled projects and litigation. I looked down at my desk. I was working on a commission for a community center, a project with a fraction of the budget of a Sterling home but infinitely more soul. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. Richard Sterling. It was the 5th time he had called this week. I let it ring. I wasn't avoiding him out of fear. I was letting him sit in the silence he had created. I was letting him feel the weight of the empty chair. He showed up on a Tuesday morning. It was raining a cold, gray Chicago drizzle that streaked the glass of my studio windows. I saw his car pull up. Not the flagship Mercedes he used to drive, but a modest sedan. He walked to the door slow, heavy. He looked older. The arrogance that used to hold his spine straight had evaporated, leaving behind a man who looked like he was wearing a suit 2 sizes too big. I buzzed him in. I didn't offer him coffee. I didn't ask how he was. I sat behind my desk, hands folded on top of a fresh set of blueprints for a community library I was designing. He stood in the middle of the room looking around at the exposed brick, the modern lighting, the quiet hum of a business that was solvent. "Alyssa is out," he said. "No preamble, no pleasantries. I fired her this morning. She's moving to Arizona." I nodded. "That seems prudent." "The tech mogul settled," he continued. "Cost me $3 million. We had to sell the lake house to cover the liquidity gap." He paused, waiting for me to wince. I didn't. "We can't finish the Highland Park Estates without the eco-frame license. The contractors are threatening to walk. The bank is calling daily." He took a step closer, leaning his hands on the back of the guest chair but not sitting. "I'm here to make you an offer, Isabella. Come back. Not as project director. As CEO. I'll step down to chairman. You take full operational control. You get 51% of the voting stock. It's yours, the whole kingdom." It was the offer I had spent my entire 20s dreaming of. It was the validation I had scraped and clawed for. He was handing me the keys to the empire, admitting that I was the only one capable of ruling it. He was trying to sell me my own inheritance. "And the catch?" I asked, my voice flat. "You relicense the IP to the company," he said. "We finish the projects. We rebuild the reputation. It's a Sterling legacy, Isabella. It belongs to you." I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't see a titan of industry. I saw a beggar king standing in the ruins of a castle he had set on fire, trying to trade a crown of ashes for a fire extinguisher. "No," I said. He blinked. "Excuse me." "The answer is no. I don't want the job, I don't want the stock, and I certainly don't want the legacy." "You're being stubborn," he snapped, a flash of the old Richard breaking through. "I'm offering you everything you ever wanted. I'm admitting you were right. Alyssa couldn't handle it. You won." "I didn't win," I corrected him. I escaped. "There is a difference." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "You think you're offering me an empire, Richard. But you're offering me a Superfund site. The company is toxic, the brand is damaged, and the culture is rot. If I came back, I wouldn't be building anything. I would be spending the next 10 years cleaning up your mess. I turned back to face him. But that's not the real reason. The real reason is that I finally understand the cost of that legacy. This was the moment, the final severance. I looked him in the eye and delivered the truth I had been carrying since the day I packed my box. There is a myth we tell ourselves about family. We tell ourselves that blood is a binding contract, that we owe our parents our survival because they gave us life, but that is a lie. You didn't raise me, Richard. You managed me. You treated my affection like a renewable resource you could exploit for profit. You demanded loyalty, but you offered only conditional employment. I am your father, he whispered, the words sounding hollow in the open space. And I am a distinct legal entity, I replied. Cutting the bloodline isn't an act of malice. It is an act of self-preservation. It is the only way to save the self from being cannibalized by the system. If I come back, I accept the premise that my worth is tied to your approval. I accept that I am a Sterling first and a person second. I reject that premise. I am not saving the Sterling name. I am saving Isabella. He stared at me for a long time. The silence stretched heavy and final. He realized then that he had no leverage. He couldn't fire me. He couldn't disown me. He couldn't even guilt me because I had balanced the ledger and closed the account. What will you do? He asked finally. With the patents? I'll license them, I said, to other firms, competitors, builders who pay their invoices and respect their architects. The Sterling Signature EcoFrame will build thousands of homes, Richard. Just not yours. He nodded slowly. He didn't say goodbye. He turned and walked out of the studio, his shoulders slumped, a man walking into a future he hadn't planned for. I watched him go. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. I turned back to my desk. The blueprints for the library were waiting. A project that would serve a community built on a foundation I had poured myself. I picked up my pencil. The line was straight. The structure was sound, and for the first time in my life, the design was entirely mine. If you've ever had to burn a bridge to light your own way, share this story. You never know who needs the courage to walk away today.